Okay, so I thought we begin with research questions, and specifically, let's begin with the quantitative side of things. Research questions or hypothesis, or both at the same time. Okay, so I hope the screen is visible. These are short lectures, the research question side of things. They are not very lengthy, so to speak. So I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, so let's look at some quantitative research questions. We looked at problem identification through literature review. And by the way, today I put all those recorded lectures up on Moodle, so you can go and you can go and find them and download those to watch at your convenience. So if we can, let's now look at quantitative research questions, so that once we have identified a research problem, then we can begin to look at formulation of a research question or research questions, sometimes which we may turn into hypothesis or an objective, so to speak. But let's first look at the quantitative side of things. So if we are looking, if you remember the quantitative or deductive approach, if you remember that that approach, I think we have discussed it extensively, and we have seen some examples, especially for those who looked at the article on the hedonic experience, multitasking. That was a paper that used hypothesis research questions, from which they then developed hypothesis. So these would be research questions one would have if someone has chosen to take a deductive approach or quantitative approach or positivist philosophical viewpoint. So we would use these. We would normally use quantitative research questions if we are looking for relationships amongst variables. Now, I gave you an example of what a variable was in one of our lectures. I gave you an example of a variable. So, for example, if you are researching on and you needed to get the age of your respondents, the age is a variable, and its value changes. For example, if I was to get the age of each one of you in this class, it would vary. Then I would want to know maybe the relationship between your age and your perception, say, of using technology for teaching and learning, what your perception is, and then maybe correlate that to understand perceived ease of use and usefulness depending on age. Is it the younger that prefer it, or is it the older that prefer it? And probably I would have started with a hypothesis saying, maybe with an assumption saying, maybe the younger master's students, younger master's students are more likely to lean towards perceived usefulness and ease of use of technology. In terms of usefulness, I would take the assumption maybe the older ones would find it more useful than the younger generation. So then I would do my research looking at those two variables, age and perceived usefulness, age and perceived ease of use. those would be the various variables we're looking at, and I'll be studying the relationship between the two. Which one causes increased perception, positive perception, and which one has decreased or an increased negative perception. If we are to keep it all positive, an increased negative perception. So we use this especially for survey studies, but like we also saw, this can also be used for laboratory studies. Yeah. So laboratory studies are also highly quantitative in nature. So this can also be used for that. So these hypotheses or research questions are usually predictions. The researcher is making a prediction about the expected relationship among variables. The example I've just given you, what I expect to be the relationship between age and perceived usefulness and ease of use. Those variables, what is the relationship between them? And I'm not saying what it is, but I'm making a prediction, then going out to test. So the test may come out positive or negative. So if it's positive, it proves the research question right. If it's negative, it proves it false. Either way, it's a good result and it's important to report it. It doesn't mean your research is failed. It means is that it has brought out new knowledge. And that's the importance of research, bringing about new knowledge. Okay, let's see if we can, let me lower this again. So the researcher will pose a research question or hypothesis, or both. Like we saw with the multitasking paper, the researchers posed research questions and then later on posed hypothesis. So the questions about the relationship in the quantitative research, the questions about relationships among the variables that investigators seek to know, they seek to prove or disprove. So then the hypothesis does the same things. It's in the question, the researcher is seeking to know. In the hypothesis, the researcher is making a prediction about the expected relationship. Now, in testing the hypothesis, the researcher goes back and answers the knowledge, what they were seeking to know. In testing the hypothesis, the researcher goes back and answers the research question. When we go back to research questions on the qualitative side, because for most of us, we are used to objectives, research objectives. The research objectives lean towards mostly the qualitative side and the mixed method side. Although we can also see it's possible to pose a hypothesis in a mixed method research. So it's possible to have an objective and a hypothesis when you especially have a mixed method approach. So the quantitative objective is it indicates the study's goal, and normally is used frequently for proposal funding. But however, we also know that we have objectives in dissertation or research work at master's levels. We know we have objectives. It's not for funding purposes, but we shall be able to delineate between the two. Hypothesis on the quantitative side and a research objective on the qualitative side. It is also possible to have a purely a research question. So the research question, which then can be turned into an objective. What to consider when we are writing research objectives and hypotheses? One, remember again, we said you can have a research question or a hypothesis or both. Yeah, it's possible to have both. You may want to consider groups that you want to compare, groups of people that you wish to compare, groups of the study groups you wish to compare. So if you have then those study groups, you then separate them with specific objectives. So take an example. If I was studying this class to see your perception on ease of use and usefulness according to age. Then I would begin to come up with a population demographics, the different demographics in population. I would maybe put age, those who are those who are probably in their 25, from between 25 and 35, those who are between 35 and 45, and then 45 and above, those who are above 45 years and above. Then I would also, again, also maybe I may decide to separate them according to male and female. And I may also want to put another variable, maybe in terms of those who are married and those who are single. Married, or in otherwise some kind of committed relationship, and those who are single. And then in that way, as I'm comparing the groups, as I want to find out, I set the hypothesis for each. So for example, I may make a prediction that based on a theory that if I can just, sorry, let me just show you as a sample. And let's say, let me do a new share. And I want to show you actually I want to show you a paper where hypotheses were developed using theory. It will come to my next point. Let's just open up a whiteboard. So I hope you can all see the whiteboard. So
yes, Doctor.
Yeah. So if we looked at the example that I gave, comparison with groups. So if I put age groups, then I put gender, then I put marital status. And then also I could also put those who they may not necessarily have been marital status.
But doctor, we can't see.
You can't see the screen.
We can't see what you're writing.
Hey.
Mm.
Let me see. What am I doing wrong? I'm trying to see.
Yeah, it has come.
It has come, eh? Okay. So
yes.
if I put marital status as one of them, then the other would be, let's say, those who are parents, yeah? Those who have children, eh? So if these are the different groups I have, and for each I'm testing on perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, and maybe intent to use. The relationship between each of these different groups. So this is what would mean to compare groups, to compare in the age groups to see which one has, and I set the hypothesis, making a prediction saying those in the lower age brackets, yeah, maybe 25 to 35, are more likely to find it easy to use. Gender, I would make a prediction that the males may find it easy to use. In terms of usefulness, I would probably put the marital status. Those who are parents find it more useful to use online. And then intent to use, I put it in the lower age brackets. And those are hypotheses that I'm making a prediction. And based on that, I then do my research. Okay? I then carry out my research. Is that okay so far?
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes, please.
What is the basis of forming the hypothesis? Do you like come up with the relationships you feel you would like to examine, or like based on your research?
Okay. Why would we do any of this now? Let us first go to, let me open up an article which has come up with hypothesis and share that with you, and then we see why they decided to do this research. Let's go through it together. I've just also seen it, but I think it will be a good answer to why would someone come up with this. So this is an article. It's not recent. It's 2012. So it's testing control, innovation, and joy as external variables to the technology acceptance model in a North American French banking environment. So let's look at the abstract. It says nowadays banks are enhancing major objectives to challenge competition, competitiveness and growth. To comply with these new objectives, they have developed new innovations, channels of contact and contracts and distribution of financial services on the net. Based on the term, this is the term model, this research will evaluate the impact of external latent variables, control, innovation, and enjoy on the internal term latent variables, ease of use, perceived usefulness, and so on and so forth. Results show a well-structured model for online banking. So now, I think for these researchers, from this abstract, they want to find out that, for example, when there is innovation, how does innovation affect ease of use, perceived usefulness, attitude towards using, intention to use? Okay, so why are they doing this? They are pointing out that banks in this period of 2012, that earlier period, were coming up with new innovations, new innovation channels, for example, especially those online banking. And we've seen that in Uganda as well, that most banks are picking up online banking. So one can then find out, one can decide to do a research saying, we want to see the applications, maybe the applications we have built, how are they, well, let's say, for example, you put control as part of the innovation, To control, maybe I would take it as security controls, security measures that you'd put. Take an example on some online banking tools. When you try to withdraw anything online, they'll first send you a verification code, maybe on another device of yours, just to make sure that it is you. That's a control measure. So the control measure like that, how does it affect ease of use? Okay? How does it affect ease of use? How does it affect attitude towards using? That if I'm using it constantly, how does it affect? Now, why would these people why would they go ahead and make such studies? Well, to first of all determine if these online, especially for banking, if all these controls that we are putting, do they in any way affect intention to use? Yeah? Will they affect adoption in use? So that is why the researcher is making this effort. Now, on why would the person specifically focus on a quantitative approach? Because all of these, the hypotheses are a quantitative approach. Your question is, why would I go ahead and come up with hypothesis? My question first would be, why has the researcher chosen to use a quantitative approach, which would require development of hypothesis? Would that sum it up for you well if I put that question that way? Why would the researcher, if you're asking why is this researcher using hypothesis, formulating hypothesis? Are you asking essentially why is the researcher picking a quantitative approach? Would that be your question?
Doctor,
Yes, please.
what comes into what comes in my mind with this article, you really see that the quantitative approach would serve a purpose. Okay, the researchers would best use quantitative approach if they are to come up with good findings.
Yes.
Because when we look at internet banking, all these online channels of transacting, we would first of all want to look at the numbers. Yeah, how many people transact, the volumes of transactions. You would want to categorize people who are transacting, which age bracket. Yeah, because when looking at ease of use, teenagers and maybe young people who are still, comfortable with the emerging technologies find it easy to use multi-factor authentication, those one-time passwords as part of control mechanism, as opposed to age people who are aged.
Yes.
So would prefer just to go over the counter or on ATM machine and make a transaction.
Yes.
So quantitative approach would make much more sense because you would want to have those figures.
Yes.
Without clear, yeah.
So I think Dennis puts it well. I don't know who had asked the question. Was it Gertrude who had asked that question? Rachel, was it the question I want to understand, was the question on why when you ask the question, why is somebody, why would you go through the process of formulating hypothesis? Is the question on whether the person has chosen a quantitative approach? Because when one has decided to formulate hypothesis, it means the researcher has chosen to take a quantitative approach. So when you're taking a quantitative approach, you are essentially saying okay. Let me first go back. Let me first go back to the basics. Rachel, did you still remember why would a researcher opt to go for a quantitative approach or a qualitative approach? Do you still remember? Do you still remember why we asked that question? Why would someone pick this approach over the other?
Yes, I still remember. I think Dennis has helped me understand it.
Okay, thank you. So then the other important thing to always remember, if there is an existing theory which can already explain the situation, and we can easily use that theory to measure what we are looking for. In other words, if there's a lot of research that has been done, so take an example, this particular article, you have these researchers who are looking at these new innovations, online banking, using the internet channel. They're looking at them. By 2012, these were relatively new applications in Europe. For us, they're just coming on board. So now, these technologies are there, but ICT, using online tools, was not new by 2012. But now it's coming into the banking sector, where you have a great deal of control. That's one. Two, you have it's innovation, it's something new. Then you have the concept of, am I enjoying it as I use it? So the fact that you have controls, which controls are going to affect ease of use. Two, it is also the factor of control in terms of, I am now more in charge of my finances. It's very, very different when I do online banking, or when I go over the counter and I'm facing a person, and the whole time I'm worried, will the person accept my signature? Maybe today they are maybe they're looking at my bank balance, maybe they're thinking this, that kind of thing. But there's that control in terms of, now it's online banking, things are within my control. I don't have to face somebody. So the perception of a user in terms of control, the perception of a user in terms of, this is a new innovation, and then enjoy, it is the pleasure one gets. So how high does the pleasure exist? And if it does exist, is it influential enough to drive one, let's say, to intentionally use this application, because I find it more enjoyable going online than going, for example, or in front of a tailor. And I think Dennis put it well. It would also be, this research would be really good to understand it in terms of age brackets. So now, one, that you're doing this on you want to understand groups. Two, we are looking at relationships between these variables, control, innovation, and then perceived usefulness. Then the research is really pointing to quantitative research. I just want to show you samples of their research hypothesis they formulated. They formulated a total of 11 hypotheses. Yeah. So here the first one was, there's a significant positive relationship between ease of use and perceived usefulness. So that was the first hypothesis they were going to test. Yeah. There is a significant positive relationship between perceived usefulness and attitude towards using. All of these are hypotheses they are going to test. Then they go further. On these were the external variables, the control and so forth. There's a significant positive relationship between control and ease of use. Then they were also going to test perceived the positive relationship between control and attitude to use. So all of them, they've done them on a positive side. So the research can either come out, it supports the hypothesis, or it does not. Do you understand? Is this clear?
Yes,
Okay. So let's first go back to the slides. And here already we have preempted something the slides point out, which is quite significant. On the issue of where do we derive these research questions from? If you can use theory, that is a good idea. If there's an existent theory and you can derive these theories from theory, from these hypotheses and research questions from theory, then please do so. Now you see how TAM comes in to support theory development. And there are other adoption theories that exist. STEM is not the only one. There are others that that exist. So these are the things to consider. Let's first of all go back to consider when we're developing a hypothesis, comparing groups. Yeah, if there are groups like Dennis said, in this research, it would be nice to see in terms of age group, relate variables. You saw how that article, the researchers were relating variables, control and ease of use, control and perceived usefulness, then describe the responses. So in terms of describing, if you saw that hypothesis, it talked about positive. Yeah, it was assuming that there was going to be a positive relationship. That is an assumption the hypothesis is making before the research. After research, it may come out that there's actually a negative relationship. That control actually does not bring about increased perceived usefulness or ease of use. Yeah? You might actually find there are many respondents who are saying they actually find maybe it has a negative impact on perceived usefulness or ease of use. But in the hypothesis, it proposes a positive relationship. It proposes that most of the respondents will say, it actually improves. It improves by perceived usefulness or ease of use. So this is what we expect to see in a hypothesis as you're formulating it. Okay, you ensure that you first of all must identify which of your variables is independent, which is dependent. Yeah. So I earlier gave an example of what would be an independent variable and a dependent variable. So we looked at the example of age. Age would be independent, but the dependent variable would be perceived usefulness. So that will, which would be, sorry, I think I'm a bit confused here. Which one doesn't change? Yeah, no, sorry. The age remains the same. It is the attitude that changes depending on, which is independent? Sorry, I'm getting a bit confused here.
I think age, gender, things like those are independent variables.
Then it is.
And then the perceptions are
dependent. Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Then we have the intervening variables. So the intervening variables also have an influence on the independent variables. So here they say demographic information will normally be the intervening variables. So for example, we talked about age. Yeah, they may also be things like levels of education. Those may affect perceived usefulness. Your level of education, maybe the employment bracket in which you belong also has either positive or negative, may influence even beyond age. Let me just give you an example. When online learning began at university level during lockdown, for most public universities, there was the adoption rate was actually very low for most public universities. And yet you find more or less the same age groups of people, same background. But what was one of the motivating factors for private universities in comparison to public universities? Well, because for private universities, if you are not teaching, that meant you are not getting paid. Whereas for a public a lecturer in a public university, whether you're teaching or not, your salary is still going to come. So that was a different motivator. That was an intervening variable. Okay, so even in our case, for example, at UMU, you'd see lecturers who are in their 70s really getting down to be part of that training, because we all knew if we don't teach, our salaries are not coming through. Okay, so those were intervening variables, whether you are in a private university or a public university. When writing, some of the things we've already talked about, when writing the research question or hypothesis, it would be good if you have a theory. There are times when people develop hypothesis because it is generally accepted knowledge, but though there's no actual theory that exists. But it would be good if you start with a theory when you're developing your research question or hypothesis, because the theory really helps to back up your presumption, the assumptions you're making, the predictions that you're making. So the theory already points to a relationship between variables. So start with the theory. That is where I would begin. And then the other thing is, the theory, first of all, helps to explain the relationship. And then the other thing is to look for what can control the effects of the variable, because we want to consider a situation where there's limited control so that we can have the most precise answers that we could get. So take an example. If I was researching on online learning and online learning for university students and lecturers, I may want to avoid one. I may want to pick a homogeneous population. So I gave you the example of a public university and a private university. So I probably wouldn't go pick lecturers from a public university in Uganda and a private university in Uganda. The two have different motivation for going online. That's one. Two, I probably would avoid students and lecturers who are in the rural context. Why? Because of connectivity issues. That's automatically going to affect. Yeah. Three, I would probably avoid different program levels. For example, masters and undergraduate. The two groups are not homogeneous. The reasons why they are seeking education is not the same. So I would pick a homogeneous population sample in order to control my study. Yeah. Is that part clear?
Doctor, something I wanted to ask.
Yes, please.
So if I told you you wanted to do that research and you're only considering public university students or lecturers, does that give you a better picture, or doesn't it give you wrong information? Because you also have to maybe ask how the private ones think, and
Now,
so
when we're doing quantitative research, we are looking for, if we go back to the positivist mindset, the positivist philosophy, do we still remember that? The positivist perspective or philosophical viewpoint. It's considered, one, scientific, even qualitative, but two, it's also considered objective. Yeah. You are looking for the most objective answer to a research question, the most objective answer. Now, when I'm looking for the most objective answer, I am trying to avoid the outliers. That is one. Two, Then too, let me also go back, Brian, to giving you an example of realism, laboratory experiments and surveys. Specifically, laboratory experiments. A laboratory experiment will give you a precise answer to a question and avoid everything else. Everything else, which researchers may, in quotes, I want to point out, which a scientist may say, will taint the answer to a question, okay? May taint the answer to a question. So let me give you an example. If a researcher in COVID-19 is looking for a medication that will treat COVID-19, that will actually treat the virus, and this researcher maybe extracts the virus and tests it in a lab, in a laboratory dish, will attach, will introduce the medication to the virus and see its effect. Now, at that moment, when it's outside the body, the researcher might say, you know what, outside the body, it could be the environment that actually killed the virus. So it doesn't give me an objective answer to my question. Does this particular medication, can it kill or even weaken this virus? Can it do that? If I have the virus outside the human body and I applied the medication or this particular concoction of chemical components, I applied it to this virus, and then I said, let me actually use a whiteboard and see if it may give a better demonstration of what I'm trying to say. So I hope you're seeing the screen.
Yes.
Okay. So we have the COVID-19 virus. This is a scientist. Yeah, scientists, COVID-19. So he starts with the lab. He or she, let me be gender sensitive, starts with the lab. He has this petri dish. He puts the COVID virus there, and then has got this medication and then applies it. And then we see the virus dying. Now, the results of this study could be disputed, saying that, you know what, the virus cannot exist outside the body, okay? So already, that is, what did we call that? What was that word again? I keep forgetting. Extraneous variable. It is outside the body, so we cannot objectively say, this is an objective. We cannot objectively conclude that this virus does affect. Now, the other option the scientist has is to get participants, okay, an experimental group. So he gets an experimental group. He gets a group of people, participants, maybe 10 people. Let's assume these are 10 people. And these 10 people that he or she gets, one, they must be homogeneous. They must appear, they must be the same. We want to ascertain that this drug inside the human, that this virus, while it's inside the human body, with no other issue, with no other circumstance, with no other, with nothing intervening, that this drug can actually kill the virus. So he gets a homogeneous group of people. These 10 people must be homogeneous. They must be the same. So they should be in the same age group. They should be in the same age group. They should have the same health status. Yeah, they should have the same health status. So same age group, same health status, the same background, economic background. Why economic background? I'm assuming economic background determines it has an influence on your health status. Do you have any underlying issues? Do you have the same immune system that you've been eating the same types of foods and so on and so forth? So that when the virus, first of all, the virus is introduced in your body, yeah, for each individual, the virus is introduced in your body, and you want to determine if this virus, once the medication is applied, will it have the same effect on the virus for all 10? And if we find out that 9 out of 10, yes, then this researcher can comfortably, objectively say this particular medication does have a negative effect on this virus, or rather will positively treat this illness. Now, Brian, it would be very different if this researcher gets these 10 people, they are not in a lab where it is a controlled environment, and he takes them to their homes, where at the same time as they're taking this drug, they are also taking fruits. They are taking multivitamins. Yeah, they're taking all these things. That will affect his research. Why? Because we all know taking these immune boosters would ultimately also bring down the virus. So you could not conclusively say that this medication objectively will treat this virus or will have a negative effect on the virus. Brian, do you understand what I'm trying to explain?
Yes.
Yeah. So now, if a researcher is trying to find out positive, because with the quantitative research, it's about control. You want a precise answer to a question, a yes or no. It's very different from qualitative research, which is looking at which wants a broad picture painted, which wants an entire picture given, a greater understanding. So take an example. The lecturer in a private university who is above 70 years and is struggling to use online learning. They're not struggling to use it because they find it easy to use or useful. Okay, it's useful because it's going to bring in a salary. But if you ask that lecturer, which would you prefer? Physical class or the online class? Automatically, that lecturer may tell you, I prefer the physical class. Why? It's at my age, really taking me through this new technology is something else. If you asked me, Sheba Nyakaisiki, why I have quickly adopted online learning, as Sheba, if you didn't give me a questionnaire, but you asked me in a qualitative research, I'll give you a much broader picture. I would tell you about my motivations for using it, and not necessarily ease of use, but there are other personal issues that are attached to it. So for me as Sheba, I would give you a much broader picture. Now the question, Brian, is for the researcher. What is the motivation for you using a quantitative approach versus a qualitative approach? What is the research question you want to answer? Is it a precise question that is being posed? Or are you exploring? Do you have a what question? What motivates a lecturer to use online learning? That one is a very qualitative question, Brian. And a survey questionnaire would not help you. But if someone is trying to determine the usefulness or the technology, someone is examining the technology itself. If the researcher is examining the technology itself, okay, its ability to be used to be used for teaching and learning, then the researcher it's better off going for a quantitative approach and therefore hypothesis. And therefore, if the researcher you're pointing to its ease of use, and remember what I had given you earlier. Let me first delete this clear. So if Brian, my research is a what question? What is a lecturer's motivation? Then here, Brian, the interviews or focus group discussions would be much better, or open-ended survey questions would be much better, because there you'd get a much broader understanding of why someone intends to use or does not intend to use. That is a qualitative approach. But if, let us say, I'm looking, like we said, if you're going quantitative, then you're looking at relationships. So if a researcher's question is online tools and the ability to increase what did we call it the last time? Learning experience. Learning experience. Here, Brian, if the research question is in line with this, do online tools increase the learning experience? Already, Brian, this person is already talking about relationship between variables, whereas this one is looking for the variables that motivate. This one is looking for. This researcher is looking for. In other words, this researcher is exploring. Okay? So this researcher is very okay going to both public and private universities. Whereas this one who is looking for whether the online tool does bring about increased learning experience. Now, Brian, what would be the disadvantage if this person did not go to a homogeneous population? So let me give you an example. If you went to a master's student at Makerere University who is barely using online tools, will you get anything, an actual positive, an actual study or real data out of them? Brian, do you get my, do you see the relationship, what I was giving you in terms of the laboratory experiment? The COVID-19 researcher, one who wants to find out if the drug actually has an effect, Now, if you go to a person, if you're testing the drug on a person who is exercising, who is taking fruits, who is taking concoctions, these other concoctions that we had, remember the jinga and so on and so forth, will it actually give you an accurate picture if the drug works? Now, you as a researcher, if you are doing this one on online tools and increased perception, will you get an accurate picture of increased learning experience if you went to Makerere University to master students who are not even using online tools? Will you get an accurate answer out of it to see if there is actual increased learning experience?
No, no.
Yeah, so you see, that is the objective of having a controlled group. Yeah, that is the reasoning behind having a controlled group, so that you can get an accurate reading. I don't know if others get what I'm trying to talk about, what I'm trying to bring forward.
Doctor, I see Arthur has his hand up.
Yes, Arthur?
Doctor, I think I'm trying to get what you're saying. So maybe I could rephrase to see if I've understood what you're saying. For example, if you had a manager and then you have someone who is maybe technical and there's a certain management tool they use, so maybe there's a biostat who is operating that tool. We would expect so the manager to use the tool, but then they have a biostat to help them. So most times when they're using that tool, it is through the biostat. So if I were to research on the ease of use, maybe if I were to make a research on that tool, I wouldn't include the manager, even though he's a stakeholder in the usage of the tool. I would actually
Yes,
focus on the actual use of the tool. Is that correct?
exactly. Yeah, that's very correct. Thank you, Arthur. I think that one you've hit the nail on the head.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, please. Thank you. So we can maybe get back to the slides. So in terms of hypothesis, we have different types of hypotheses that can be written. We have hypotheses that do not predict, they don't predict, they predict no relationship between variables. Then you have those which are directional, those which are non-directional. So a null hypothesis, let me see if I can give you an example of a null hypothesis where they predict no difference or no relationship. Let me see if I can just pick out one, just get an example. Let me just get you an example. Give me an example. So let us say, let me give you an example of the COVID-19 researcher, and where this researcher is trying to prove that is a particular drug that it can actually kill, it can actually have a negative impact on the COVID-19 virus. The researcher can even go ahead and also create a null hypothesis to find out that if a patient or a participant or a certain test subject has the COVID-19 virus and is receiving the drug, but also is taking these immune boosters and these concoctions that we're taking, that even though he's taking these drugs, they may not be any significance, that the drug will still perform the way it should perform. So that would be a null hypothesis that the researcher puts forward and also does a test on it, okay, to show that it has no negative impact, that taking these other drugs, and that the person actually does the test, that taking these other concoctions does not have a negative effect on the drug's positive reaction to or negative reaction to the COVID-19 virus. That would be a null hypothesis. The directional hypothesis is where it predicts a relationship, okay? Where the hypothesis predicts a relationship between variables. For example, the online tool may produce increased learning. That is a directional relationship. Then there may be a non-directional relationship where it will predict a relationship, but may not say whether it is positive or negative. Yeah, may not state that there's either positive or negative relationship, but is simply there to prove that there's a relationship between the two. So take an example. There are people who predict that that there's a relationship between use of artificial contraceptives and the breast cancer. Yeah, that there's a relationship, but they've never proved whether it is positive or negative. But they simply propose that there's a relationship between the two. Okay. Now I also gave you the example of the palliative care research, or rather data that is collected, which shows that there's a relationship between HIV, people who are HIV positive, and a certain type of cancer. But they have not yet proposed a hypothesis to say whether it has a whether the HIV causes the cancer or not, if there's a causal effect. So that would be a non-directional hypothesis, simply to show that there is an actual relationship, but doesn't propose the direction it takes, whether it's positive or negative. So those are the different hypotheses someone can predict. You remember the research done in multitasking. Let me even go further. The research done in multitasking. For them, these researchers were focused on actually showing the amount of pleasure that someone experiences from using these smart applications, the amount of pleasure. Now, from that point, another researcher could say that the amount could then now relate to that pleasure, increased pleasure in these using these applications can bring about a negative effect, let's say, on concentration. Let me even state it even more precisely. Shepa Nyakaisiki using WhatsApp while she's teaching reduces her concentration on the teaching process. While she's teaching, if I start to use WhatsApp as I'm teaching, it will reduce. So that could be a hypothesis, a directional hypothesis. A non-directional one is when someone says using these applications while will affect tasks which need concentration. That one is non-directional because it is not saying whether it affects positively or negatively, just that there is an effect on it. I don't know if I'm making sense. Yes, Arthur?
But Doctor, I'm wondering, would you base how you said the hypothesis, would you base on the existing literature to take a direction on how you set the hypothesis, or it doesn't matter how you state it?
You can use literature on making a defense on why you're taking a directional or non-directional. It depends on you. Or two, you can use theory. It could be literature, other research at this. Let's say, for example, Arthur, the multitasking group used literature to push forward their reasoning, the purpose for their type of research that they went ahead to measure. For them, they said other research simply did what do they call it? They used the positivists, or yeah, they think that they use the philosophical side of things, where they were just trying to show that pleasure is yes gained, but not how much. So for them, it was literature based. But for you, Arthur, you can also decide to use theory, for example. For example, a theory like TAM makes predictions already, and then you can say, okay, let me use these predictions based on this theory to create a hypothesis. So it could be from literature or it could be from theory, which either one of them can guide your hypothesis development. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, doctor. Thank you.
Okay. So in writing the research question, based on which was there another question? Sorry.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, please, please, sorry.
So let's start with
Doctor,
Rachel.
and there are instances where you may want to test a causal relationship where you haven't found any theory that is in support, nor literature review. Or you have to always make sure at least there is literature review or a theory.
Sorry, could you please repeat the question?
What if the kind of relationship of variables you would want to examine, you haven't been able to find the relevant literature, no theory that is supporting what you want to check out?
Okay. One, if you are coming up with an hypothesis, make sure that this is something that is generally accepted, that there's an actual relationship between the two things. So I gave you the example. Of the HIV. There's data that points to HIV, the HIV virus, and a particular type of cancer. That is data that is actually pointing to the relationship. So a researcher can say, let me develop a hypothesis based on this to find out, to test this further. So that one, Rachel, is not based on literature review, but based on data that actually exists. So whatever the case, Rachel, there must be a basis from which you're formulating the hypothesis. It can't simply be Rachel's imagination or Sheba's imagination. Yeah? Do you get what I'm pointing out?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, thank you. Someone else had a question?
Just bring to attention that Blaise was asking you to repeat what you said on null hypothesis, and also asking where does the alternative hypothesis fall?
The alternative hypothesis fall. Okay, let me go back to the null hypothesis, where you predict no difference or no relationship. Yeah. Let me see if I can pick an example from the IT side. Okay, when we look at let me first go back to the term theory. I remember one time I got this example. Okay, let's use this the term theory side of things. I want to pick a realistic example. Just give me a minute, please. Give me a minute, please. I just get an example. Okay, now let me use term. I think term would be a better option. Let me get a new one. Okay, so term tells us, or let me go back to the online learning tools. Online learning tools and preference. Preference based on gender. So I am looking at preference. So I go out to do a study and I ask the same questions based on the same questions, both male and female, and just to see which one prefers online learning tools between male and female. I'm not determining whether there's by the time I state the hypothesis, I'm not looking at whether there is a negative. I'm not stating that the male prefer and the female prefer. I'm simply stating preference of online tools versus physical classes between male and female. Here I've not stated that male students are they will have a positive preference towards online tools and females have a negative preference. I've not stated that. I'm simply trying to find out preference for online tools versus physical tools. And then afterwards, I find out the difference between male and female. So my hypothesis before the research did not predict whether the males would prefer it or the females would prefer it. I'm simply trying to find out. So now this kind of research would bring about description, okay? It would bring about description at the end to say there is maybe a greater preference. There's a greater preference between towards online learning amongst the male students as opposed to the female students. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it makes sense, Doctor.
Yeah. So the alternative hypothesis would be the alternative would be to say that what would be the alternative hypothesis to this one? Probably it would be we want to find out if we can reject our null hypothesis. What would be the alternative hypothesis? We want to see that if we prove the alternative, it rejects the null hypothesis automatically. What would be the alternative hypothesis here? Let me clear this. What would be the alternative hypothesis? The alternative hypothesis would then would look at the aspect of gender and online learning. So the hypothesis may state something like gender has no effect or rather, something, gender has no effect on preference. To online learning. So with this, the researcher would then go ahead to find out, does gender actually have an effect? And using the same data, may want to prove or disprove that there's actually no preference levels as far as whether it's online, whether you're male or female, you don't really have an actual preference on this. So this would be the alternative. So the null hypothesis comes with an N, alternative comes with an A at the bottom to indicate which is null, which is alternative. Does this make sense?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So let's continue. I think we're about to finish with qualitative research, or rather, sorry, quantitative research questions. Now, it's also possible to do mixed methods, to have a research question that is qualitative in nature and then a research question that is quantitative in nature. In other words, to have mixed methods for your research. So in that case, your two research questions must be clear. We are going to look at qualitative research questions in a few minutes, so don't get worried about that. Remember that the quantitative research question would be talking about relationships between variables. So it is possible for you to have a research question that is quantitative leaning and then a research question that is qualitative leaning. So that in that way, your research has two phases, okay? Your research may have two phases. But, however, let me just, so that you don't get confused, there may be, sorry, can you see the screen? I hope I didn't ask. You can see the screen, eh? Let me just.
You're not sharing.
Sorry?
You're not sharing.
I'm not sharing. Oh,
No.
my goodness. And I suspected, Okay, sorry. This one is the wrong. I had opened both slides. So can you see the
Yes, doctor.
the screen? Okay. So let's just before we get, I hope I don't confuse you on this part. One may opt to have a mixed method approach. Okay. One may opt to have a mixed method approach. Again, depending on your research problem. You may like Brian's case, where Brian raised the question that if you just went for a homogeneous group, there may be other things you're missing. Or if you went, let's say, for a public university, there may be things that you're missing out in the private university. Now, what then I would suggest for Brian is go then for if you want to get a bigger picture, a more elaborate picture on adoption of online tools. Then in that case, I would suggest a mixed method approach. With a question, a quantitative research question, which wants to have a precise answer, that is one. Then you have a qualitative research question, which gives you, maybe even goes further on motivation. So you can have that approach depending on, again, what it is you're trying to discover. But the mixed method approach would allow you to have your research objectives, your research questions, which can be turned into objectives, where you find out motivation. And then the other one, which is actually pointing to the tools actually bringing about improved learning, and whether there's actual improved learning and teaching, increased learning and teaching because of online tools. So you can have that approach. It's quite possible. So you have your research questions, which are qualitative learning, and then your research questions, which are quantitative learning. So that is possible. But however, I just want to also state this side. Your research can be qualitative in nature. I gave you the example of my research, which was qualitative in nature. And then I adopted quantitative tools, not a quantitative method, but a quantitative tool to triangulate. That's different. Okay? I hope you understand that there's a difference between the two, where you say, let me have, my research may lean more towards the quantitative approach, and I have maybe a purely, I decide to have a survey which is with a homogeneous group. But Brian, I go ahead and say, let me have a qualitative tool, data collection tool. For example, I have an open-ended part of the questionnaire, which is going further to say, is asking the respondents, what are the reasons for your motivation for using? Can you explain further why you like or dislike? That is the part which is going further to ask the qualitative side. So Brian, that is not necessarily the same as mixed methods, okay? But it is simply you adding if your research is quantitative learning, you say, let me add a qualitative data collection tool to get a wider understanding, to get more from the respondents. If it is your research is leaning towards qualitative, but you adopt a quantitative tool to triangulate. I hope I'm making sense. I'm just trying not to confuse you further. Your research may decide to have purely quantitative research questions, but in your data collection, you decide to adopt a qualitative tool, or your research may be more leaning towards qualitative, but because you want to triangulate, you also adopt a quantitative tool. Am I making sense?
Yes, doctor, you are.
Okay, thank you. So as you're writing, during so this is just to add further, if you're writing if you decide to have a mixed method approach, with the two, first of all, delineate between the qualitative research question and the quantitative research question. So if you have those two research questions, so for example, like in Brian's case, when he asked if I'm doing research on online learning and increased learning experience. So I may have the research questions asking, do online tools increase the learning experience of online learners? That is a typically quantitative research question. Then I include, because I want to get, Brian wants to get also the qualitative side. He includes the question, what would motivate university learners to adopt online tools? University learners and lecturers to adopt online tools. So those two research, if those were his two research questions, he would know that with my first question, the quantitative one, I can go purely quantitative where I use a survey. Then to answer my second question, what would motivate to adopt these tools in teaching and learning? Then he would add, maybe to the questionnaire, he would add open-ended questions to get really that understanding of what is it that is motivating this person to continue using the online tool. So In other words, the first part of his survey may, let me put it, the first part of his survey, which is trying to find out if there's increased learning, may actually come out negative. In other words, the students may actually point out, the students and lecturers may point out, in actual sense, maybe the learning process is equally the same. It's the same thing as when it's a physical class, or it's actually negative, but the students and lecturers continue to use it. Then what is it that is motivating? The open-ended side, the qualitative side will bring out, why is it these students are continuing? Or you may find there is actually no difference between online learning and the physical class. Then what is it that is motivating? So the qualitative side will help Brian bring out in case the hypothesis is actually disproved, there's actually no difference, then the qualitative side will help Brian to find out, then what is it that is motivating these people to continue? Do you get the difference, the two questions, the two approaches?
Yes, Doctor, I'm understanding you.
Okay, I hope it's the same for everyone.
And I think this also applies in a situation where you want to determine the levels of satisfaction.
Yes.
By maybe getting feedback, in form of words, maybe people are very satisfied with the use of, or some are partially satisfied, someone are, 50-50.
Yes.
I think such could also fall under mixed method.
Yes, that's a good analogy. Thank you, Dennis, for that. So that concludes our look at the quantitative side. Let us look at the qualitative side of things. So I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So the first and most important thing to differentiate between a qualitative research question and a quantitative research question is that the qualitative research question is not assuming anything. You remember the example that I was giving you, what motivates online learners and lecturers to use online tools? That is a typically qualitative question because it's not assuming, it's going out to, it's an exploratory question, okay? It's going out to explore. So the response I will get it's quite broad. Now, the question of what motivates is a broad question. It could be anything that is motivating. I'm not assuming anything. It is very different when I say, if I pose the question of salary increment motivates lecturers to use online learning, or freedom of location motivates lecturers to use online tools. That question is not broad. It's actually insinuating that my freedom of location is motivating me to use an online learning tool. That one it's very precise. It's talking about freedom of location. It's a very precise question, very different from what motivates a lecturer to adopt an online tools. So that one can give you any kind of response. It could be freedom of my location. It could save me on costs. It could be that I have a phobia for looking at people in the face as I'm teaching. They are different. It's exploratory in nature. Yeah. I'm going out to explore a phenomena. What is motivating? So when your research problem is prompting you to have a broad research question, it's going out to seek to find out, that then points you to the qualitative approach. What is the broadest question that I can ask regarding this study? So usually, the qualitative questions are quite telling. The what question, or how, in what ways. When you have that kind of question, which are exploratory, it normally points you to a qualitative approach. Very different from the quantitative, which looks at cause and effect, relationships. Yeah, very different. So now, with the qualitative research question, there is a central phenomena. There's a central phenomena that we are trying to explore. So, for example, the one I gave you was the motivation to use online tools. Motivation, that is the central phenomena. Something that we're going out to explore, to discover, to understand. Whereas the quantitative research question already demonstrates that you have an understanding that this thing may have an effect on this. This may have a positive or negative effect on this thing. Insinuating that you already have an understanding, or this research area has some level of understanding on a particular topic. Blaise has given another one which says, what motivates people to shop online? Yeah, that's a qualitative, that's already pointing to a qualitative approach. So here are just some examples that I've picked out, specifically on the ICT side. So someone may say, what factors affect adoption of IS innovations in an organization? So that is an exploratory question. And it's an exploratory type of research question. Or adoption of enterprise architecture's effect on processes on government entities. That if those government entities that have adopted enterprise architecture, what effect has it had on ICT processes? That's also exploratory. Interoperability of healthcare systems, what factors affect? That's also exploratory in nature. So with qualitative research questions, we normally have a central research question and then sub-research questions. Okay, you have the central research question and then sub-research questions. Now, specifically, I don't know, as I'm speaking, I don't know if you see already the relationships between, when we were doing our undergraduate research projects, we had an overall objective, and then we had specific objectives. Okay? Do you remember that? The specific objectives. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yes. So this is very much related, not so. So you have where you have the overall research question and then the overall research objectives. So normally we would say, have your overall research question, which you can then turn into a research objective. Then have your sub-research objectives, which you can then turn into specific objectives. Okay. So here, I have a sample. Designing an e-learning application for rural learners. You can be specific on demographic here. Maybe you can say designing an e-learning application for rural learners at undergraduate level or postgraduate level. You can be very, very specific. Or for secondary school learners. Then the research question could be, how can the methodological framework design and how can we design, how can we using a methodological framework to design an accessible e-learning platform for rural learners in a developing country? That could be the question, that could be the research, overall research question I can ask. Yeah. In other words, how can I scientifically design? Let me just scientifically design an accessible e-learning platform. By the time I'm talking about rural learners, it means I'm talking about accessibility, what is accessible for rural learners. Yeah. What devices do they have available to them? What device will be the lightest that a rural network with all its intricacies, its poor connections, and the rain comes and so on and so forth. So, in other words, what method can I use that can help me design the most accessible platform for rural learners? So this research question will lead me to ask questions like, what will be my architecture framework? What device will I use? What software platform will I use that is light enough? Which would be the best device that this rural learner can use? Should it be web-based or should it be mobile application-based? That kind of question. So in other words, how then can I split this research question into specific research questions? Can we just have an exercise on that? Is it possible for us to have an exercise on this? I'll put it up on Moodle, and then you can explore how we can split that overall research question into specific research questions. Let me move further. Let me move on a little bit further. Now, your sub-questions can then be turned into actual questions during interviews, or they can be points for you to on what it is you're going to seek out in observation, either in the case study or from literature. Okay? Either in the case study or from literature. Our research questions should use exploratory verbs. So things like to discover. If we're seeking to discover, that means we're looking for new themes which can then be turned into theory. We can seek to understand. Yeah, this is ethnography. Seek to understand. So also this raises new themes or theories. Explore a process. So this one can most likely look for new variables. Describe an experience. Describe experiences, the phenomenology. This is like when we looked at motivation. Motivation, that is you're trying to understand more and more, report the stories, the narrative of the research. So depending on what it is you're looking for, most of the time our research falls under exploring a process and describing experience as ICT. Most of the time, this is where our research falls. Exploring, if it is qualitative in nature, not if it is qualitative, we're trying to explore a particular process or processes further to understand them better in a particular case, or even describe the experience further, the experience, let's say, of applying enterprise architecture in a particular case. Describe the experience of implementing a new system and maybe how it improves a process, or the experience of users when this new application is implemented in a particular case study. Any questions before I go further?
Doctor, my question would be,
Yes, Moses.
is, I am seeing as if the stuff that we will need in our dissertation this side of qualitative. Does it mean that our research will be qualitative? Because the question is then the objectives, then the way the structure looks like, it is appearing as if it is similar to what we are expected to do. Yes, maybe talk about it.
Now, I wouldn't dictate to you in that way. I would still be open to the quantitative side, because I think there was a student who did a quantitative research in the ICT side, maybe 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. It's not necessarily that it's going to be qualitative in nature. You can't do a research that is qualitative in nature, or even mixed method. Moses, the most important thing I would point to you is, let me give you an example. If let us say, let me first go to again our whiteboard. So let us have the example of still online learning, okay? And you remember, Moses, when I pointed out something, a key point, for you masters, you may be implementing a system or an application, whatever the case, but it's not something that you actually developed yourself. So let us say it is an AI application. You want to look at AI application and increasing learning experience. Yeah, increasing learning experience. So if I was looking this perspective, say you're an IS student, you decide to implement. It may not be you who design it. It could be someone else can help you develop this AI application, and its purpose is to positively influence, let's say influence, not increase. Let's say influence learning experience. So, Moses, let's say I use design science, yeah? Design science allows you to develop your application outside of a context. You develop a prototype, implement it. And as you when you implement the prototype, you evaluate your AI application. And your evaluation is to measure positive influence. So, Moses, in this case, you would have developed a research question saying, does AI positively influence? Or it could be just does AI influence the learning experience? And then from that, maybe using the help also of theory, you developed your hypothesis. Yeah? You develop your hypothesis saying AI has a positive effect, maybe on retention. Then AI has a positive effect on assignment completion. Yeah? Assignment completion. Those are two hypotheses. And you go ahead and test them. Now, already Moses, I can clearly show you here, this research is very possible for an IS student. And it's qualitative in nature. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to limit you in thinking that your research is strictly qualitative in nature. No. Even a designed application can be implemented within a certain context, and you actually do a test and carry out a quantitative research on that using IS. Moses, do I answer your question?
Yes, does that mean that I will not have the general question, the sub question is the main objectives, specific objectives, like the way you are setting them in qualitative research?
No, you would have your overall research questions, maybe even have two research questions, but you can have your overall research question, then develop your hypothesis based on your overall research question.
Okay.
Okay. I hope this makes sense for others.
It will make sense. It is coming, Doctor.
Okay, let's hope it makes sense. Now, what are some of the common problems with qualitative research? First of all, maybe deciding on the range of issues that are of interest. Picking one specific area, because you're essentially, unlike the quantitative side, which is very, very specific, you're looking at relationships between one or more variables. Okay, that is very, very specific, and the researcher knows exactly what it is they're looking for. With qualitative research, depending on the broad area, one can have a problem on limiting or trying to narrow down their research area. We have a tendency to want to solve everything. However, normally this you can go through the exercise with your supervisor, try and limit what problem it is you want to solve. I remember specifically one student, I remember she was doing research, looking at, I think she was in the area of her specific work area. She was a master's student. They were looking at using technology, especially mobile technology, to track tourists. So let me just give you an example. In her case, they were looking at, Uganda was looking at attracting more tourists into Uganda to come to, let's say, to go for hikings. You go to hike in a particular forest, or these ones who climb the mountains, those ones who are climbing Mount Rwenzori. And then now because of that, they were looking at using technology, for example, to map out areas that maybe what is currently there at Mount Rwenzori or this particular rainforest. Then two, they were using this technology to track tourists as they went hiking into certain places to track these areas. So when she came out to do her research, she was looking at mapping out Rwenzori and then looking at tracking. So we're telling her, you know what? Pick one thing. You can't do, sorry, this has gone erratic. You can't do mapping out of areas for what is currently existing on Mount Rwenzori and then at the same time do tracking. Pick one thing and focus on that. Yeah, you're not going to solve everything. So deciding on what area you want to look at, what's the specific area you want to look at is really key for qualitative research. Otherwise, you'll end up in circles. You find yourself you're just remaining at proposal level because your supervisor is asking you, what exactly do you want to do? Okay. I remember also me when I was also doing my research, when I would tell people, when I would be talking, then the professors would ask, okay, so what exactly do you want to do? And you're thinking, it means whatever I've been saying doesn't make sense. So understanding the area, what area you want to do, if it's too much or it is too little, okay? Not being able to think of an area or topic that is of sufficient interest to you. That is another thing. With qualitative research, it's about interest. Again, where quantitative research beats because it is very specific. It's very specific and one can know the direction their research is taking. Qualitative research can tend to mislead you if you don't know exactly what you want to do and why you want to do it. What is of sufficient interest to you? Coming back to this one of which area should I focus on? Which particular area should I focus on? Then clearly articulating my research question. If you can't clearly articulate your research question, your overall research question, then it means you haven't picked out your research area clearly. Okay, but this you can all do with the help of your supervisor. Your supervisor should be able to help you narrow down what it is you want to do. Certain things, of course, which help us know that our research question is either qualitative or quantitative, or you're exploring effects. You're trying to understand what actually is there that is causing an effect. If you want to understand issues. Whereas on the quantitative side, you're on the qualitative side, you're not trying to prove anything. You're not trying to measure anything. You're simply trying to understand. Yeah? If you're trying to find what are the effects, you're not trying to prove the effects, but what is it that causes effect? Okay? What is it that causes effect to this thing? For example, if Brian was asking, what is it that is motivating? What is it that causes motivation? That is exploratory. Very different from a researcher who is saying, this causes effect. My salary will cause me to adopt ICT. Okay? That is quantitative in nature. If you're gathering participants, you're gathering participants, when your question is open and flexible, meaning it's not pointing to any particular answer, unlike the quantitative side, which is already predicting an answer, but this one is open in nature. So here are just some more guidelines. Most of these things are repetitive. There are things I've been saying already, so you can simply go through them. Our research questions can lead to a descriptive nature. We're trying to describe a phenomena, like what motivates. We're trying to describe. Interpretive, the meaning behind something, the meaning behind something. In ICT, we will rarely go to interpretive. We can go to descriptive, but not interpretive, okay? It can go theoretical in asking what are those things that happen, about those things that will happen when this thing happens. That is when it can go theoretical. It's possible for us to go theoretical. So our research can be either descriptive or theoretical, but rarely interpretive as ICT students. Just here are some guidelines on what is a good research question and what is a bad research question. The first thing is that it is specific in nature. Yeah, that by the time you answer it, you'll have answered a research question. If the research question can be answered with Google, then that is not a research question. For example, if you say, what are the factors affecting adoption of mobile devices? I could probably Google that and there's already an answer for it. So that therefore it's not a research question, okay? If it focuses your research, if your research question focuses your research. Now this guideline, at this point someone may hear it and say, what do you mean by it focuses my research? If I know, like I gave you the example of the student who was looking at mapping because she was talking about President Museveni, most of the time says that I think she said there was a tourism statement which was released, which was misleading about some of our tourist futures. And they were saying this was misleading. So she was saying our research wants to clearly map out what exists. Then at the same time, track. Now, that clearly was not a focused research area. It was not a focused research area because she's looking at mapping out what actually exists, what we have as Uganda for tourism, and then tracking active tourists. Those are two different focus areas. So your research should clearly tell you and the read and your audience what it is you're focusing on. And your research question should require an answer. Yeah, that we don't have to go to Google to get that answer. Or we can just use one statement to answer your research question. If it's exploratory in nature, for example, what would motivate me to use as a lecturer? That can give you several answers. There are many of us who are online, but our reasons for motivations are quite different as lecturers. Yeah. It can be answered through research. That means it's not answered through Google. It's an important field. That means that there is an actual research community. Okay? There's an actual research community that seeks this answer. So in other words, literature review, literature review, literature review. Is manageable. That means it is focused. It's not too broad, neither is it too narrow. So these are just some tips you can use to find out if your research question is sufficient, but then also go through it with your supervisor, and that is key. But these are just some tips you can do. Yes, please. Yes, Winfred.
Thank you, doctor. I just have, I need just clarity.
Yes.
When you say my research question shouldn't be answered by Google,
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to talk more for me to get it properly, because there is nothing Google cannot answer. So I'm confused in that.
Okay. So say, if now right now you ask me what is a null hypothesis, Google can answer that, not so.
Yes, doctor.
But if you ask a question, what motivates online learners in a developing economy like Uganda to adopt online learning? Do you think Google can answer that question?
Okay, I get it, doctor.
No. Uh-huh. So that's a research.
But AI can.
I think it will just bring generic answers, not exactly what you're looking for.
Not
Exactly.
exact, but something similar.
Yes. So
But
that's
AI
where.
can, doctor.
Pardon?
AI can.
It will give you generic answers, but that research question research question in a developing economy like Uganda, already you're pointing to learners who have just adopted e-learning, and we don't have publications on that. What is it that is motivating us? Because 4 years ago, none of us was online. But now, quite a number of us are online. What is the motivation, even after the economy has opened up? Okay, so still, AI will give you generic answers, but not scientifically generated answers. I don't know if I answer your question, but I think I have. I think I've more or less answered.
Yeah, doctor, I'm answered.
Okay. Now, one of the things I want to point out on tips is this very last point. Don't worry too much at the beginning. Questions often change throughout planning. Now, the question and the topic are related. Many times you hear a student telling you, Madam, I have this topic. What do you think? What do you think of the topic? The topics it will even change on the last day. Yeah? It's the content that matters, how you arrive at your research question. Okay? That you've clearly understood, and you can see the logic between your research problem, your research question, and the focus you want to take. The research problem, the focus you want to take, it is the research problem. Yeah, let me put it, the research problem, the focus you want to take, the focus area, and then leading to your research question. So in between this is a lot of literature review. A lot of literature review and discussion with your supervisor. So don't worry too much. It's a process. It's not something you get in one day. Okay, that concludes our topic on research questions and hypotheses. Do we have any question or comment?
I have a question. Just
Yes, please.
I'm requesting that maybe you help me and you set for me some two topics, research topics, one for quantitative type side and one for qualitative research side, so that I get a clear picture of those two.
You've given me a tough one, eh? You've given me a tough one. Now, first of all, before we go through to that, I'm going to put up the research question, the qualitative research question on the forum, on the discussion. Eh? Then from there, I will post others. Is that okay?
It's okay, doctor.
Okay. Do we have any other question or comment? If no, let me post this on Moodle, and by Friday I should have also finished marking your group assignment. So with that, let's meet on Friday, and I think by Friday I will have posted the group assignment of the concept paper for you. Is that okay?